Folks, welcome back to another episode of Coffee, Tea, and Crime. Today's episode, Errand to Death. Alright folks, we're going to be in the great state of Alabama, down in the city of Birmingham. The primary resource material for this episode is going to be the Court of Criminal Appeals in Alabama. Now it's December 20th. 1976. Our victim, Gwinnett Sheehan, she was originally from the town of Clio, Alabama. Same little town that the sitting governor, George Wallace, was from. Now, she had recently graduated from Birmingham Southern College. Now, that's a small college there in Birmingham, but fairly prestigious, a veritable who's who of graduates from that school. Now, she was working at Parisienne's department store. Now, that was located just down the street at 5 Points West. Now, she left work and she went over to see her fiance, a fellow named Ramsey Lane, and he was over cooking out at the ATO fraternity house there. So now when Miss Sheehan gets there, they're going to sit down and have some dinner, and she's going to take off to go see her folks. Well, they were going to have a salad, and they didn't have any salad dressing, so since he was manning the grill, she says, well, I'll just run down here to the store. Now, there was a U-Totem store over on Graymont Avenue, 821 Graymont to be exact. That's just a couple blocks away from the campus there. Now, she's driving her 1969 white four-door Mercury Marquis, and she had it just packed full of stuff. She had wrap presents, and so obviously you're going home to see your folks. You got to take them some presents. So now Mr. Ramsey, he sat there and he watched Miss Sheehan drive down 12th Street, go to the entrance of Fraternity Row. And of course, then she's going to run around to the store. Won't take but just a couple minutes to get there. Now later, when Mr. Ramsey would testify in court, he would say that Miss Sheehan owned a portable television set, and he saw it in her packed belongings in her car. Now, he had been with her when she'd purchased that TV back September of 1976. They had purchased the TV at the Sears store there in Century Plaza. Now, in his testimony, he said when he last saw her, she wore a blue jean type skirt, white turtleneck blouse, and she had a rust-colored car coat on. Now, Mr. Ramsey, he waits for about 45 minutes, and she hadn't showed back up. Now, he's starting to get a little worried. So he starts driving around the neighborhood looking for her. He's thinking maybe her car broke down. So he drove over there on Graymont to check the little market, and her car's not there. He drove over to the 5 Points West, and he went back over to the frat house, and he asked a few people if they'd seen her. Nobody had seen her. He called the emergency room at the hospital, and then he calls the police. At that time, police departments across the country, they had that ridiculous 24-hour rule. You had to wait 24 hours. Now, I don't know if Birmingham waited the entire time or not, but they didn't just jump right on the case. So finally, they put out a bolo on the car and on Miss Sheehan. Everybody's looking for her. Now, the next morning, police officer locates Miss Sheehan's car. It's over there just off Cherry Avenue. Now, it's down a dirt road. It's off of Daniel Payne Drive. Now, I believe the name was a little bit different back in the day when this event occurred. Now, you could see it from Cherry Avenue. And it was an area where they had dug for coal for years and years. So now they send an evidence technician. He comes from the Hoover Police Department. Now, he would testify later that he said it was about 3/4 of a mile from the intersection of Cherry Avenue and Highway 78. Now, he photographed the scene. Of course, you're going to photograph the scene around the car and then the car itself. And he had the car towed to the city lot because they're going to process that car inside. Now, he recovered from the car 2 spent .22 caliber shells that were found near the left front door, 1 spent .22 caliber shell found on the right front floorboard, 1 lead bullet recovered from the what was referred to as the hat rack area of the rear seat. Now, there was a reddish colored stain that was on the right rear quarter panel. A blue skirt was found lying partially on the right front floorboard. A piece of seat cover that was removed from the upper right of the front seat area. And you got 11 latent prints. Now, the senior fingerprint technician, according to the technician, she got 1 usable print. So, of course, at the time now they got a print, but they don't know whose print it is. Now, about 3 hours later, after the car's been found, another officer, he gets dispatched on a call somewhere in the area of the 3800 block of 4th Place West. Some folks over there called in and said there's a body laying on the side of the road. Now, it's up there in the extreme northern part of Birmingham. And that's in an area known as Hooper City. Some folks might say it's a little south of there, but that's the area of town it's in. So now they send an evidence technician. Now, he takes photos of the victim's car, and then he goes over there on 4th Place West to take pictures of the body. Now, while he's over there, he collects 6 spent .22 caliber holes or shell casings and 1 live round. Now, they called the deputy coroner for Jefferson County up there just a few minutes after 12, so they were hollering for him about 15 minutes after the body was found. Now, they measured her distance from the road at 9 feet in the grass. The court says that she was identified on the scene. I'm not really sure how they identified her. That wouldn't be a positive identification, but it would be a start anyways. They did determine that it wasn't Miss Sheehan. The area where her body got dumped out, there's houses in the area, but none right there where the body was found. Now, on the scene, looked like to him that caused death was probably a bullet wound to the chest area. Now, he saw some other wounds on the body. And, of course, now they had the crime scene technician take photos. Same thing as they did with the car. They're going to take photos of the area and then of the body itself. The general rule is you start out from a distance taking photos and you work your way in. So now they moved the body to Cooper Green Hospital. That's where they were going to do the autopsy. And he was present during the autopsy. Now, during the autopsy, they observed 3 penetrating wounds, which turned out to be gunshot wounds. Because now sometimes you see a wound, you don't know if it's a gunshot wound or a stab wound. Now, other than the one in her chest, she had 2 in the left buttocks and 1 in the right buttocks. Now, the coroner's office, they removed 4 bullets from the body. 3 removed from the pelvic area and the other one from the upper chest. Now, the coroner's office said cause of death was death due to shock and hemorrhage due to multiple gunshot wounds. Now, they had a criminologist started examining some of the material that had the reddish stains on it. They had reddish stains in the roadway itself, what appeared to be a blood trail going into the grass where the body was at. Now, he determined that to be human blood. Now, he also found that there was a stain on a piece of the seat cover, and that was determined to be human semen. Now, that reddish stain on the right rear quarter panel of the car, that was blood. Now, articles of clothing they recovered that belonged to the victim were all found to have had blood on them. Now, they keep looking, and they cannot find their suspects in this case. You have to remember this period of time, you can't just run to a computer and check APHIS to see if there's a fingerprint match. So now a little more than a month later, January 28th, 1977, and everybody is looking for these suspects, and everybody knows they're looking for a .22 caliber pistol. Now, some police officers, they stop a fellow there on 3rd Street West, there in the Elanton Village housing project. Now, they snatched this fella up because they noticed he had a pistol up under his shirt. So they grab him up, and it's an RG-14 nickel-plated blue cylinder .22 caliber pistol. And the serial number had been removed, and the barrel had tape on it, which is unusual. Now, they collected that pistol, and obviously they're definitely going to check this pistol. I would say anybody that had a .22 that got arrested, that pistol was getting checked. That's how you solve crimes. Now, the officer that made the arrest, he said he'd probably seen a couple hundred of those RG pistols. Heck, they were around in the 90s when I was in Memphis riding in a car. But now, he said the reason he remembered that pistol so much was because it had a 3-inch barrel, and he'd never really seen one like that. The ones I saw all had 2-inch barrels. Now, they test-fired that pistol. They compared it to the 4 bullets removed from the body of Miss Sheehan. And according to the ballistics fella, he said that the bullets that killed Miss Sheehan matches the bullet that was test-fired from that pistol taken off that fella in the housing project named Thomas. Now, when it's all said and done, they would indict 3 suspects. Now, they had Thomas in custody because he had the murder weapon. Now, as it turns out, all 3 of these suspects went to Daniel Payne College. I don't know if it's a coincidence or not, but where the car was found, the victim's car, and where the victim's body was found, you could throw a rock and hit that college. So they indicted 3 men, a fellow named Neal, one named Jones, and then Thomas, and they've already got their hands on him. Now they finally get all 3 arrested, and they have separate trials for them because they're all facing the death penalty. Now, during the trial, a man that was acquainted with all 3 of the suspects, in fact, his roommate was Suspect Jones. They lived in an apartment there on 8th Avenue West, 900 block. Now, that's just right across the street from the college. Now, he also knew the other 2 suspects. He knew them through his roommate. What he testified in court to was that he remembered the date of December 20th, 1976, because it was near Christmas, and he said that Neal and Jones and Thomas came to the apartment. Now, while they're all sitting there in the apartment shooting the breeze, Suspect Jones said, "Look, my car," which was a yellow Chevrolet, said it's making a really bad sound. And he asked this fella, he says, "Will you drive it and see if you can figure out what's wrong with it?" So the fella takes the car out, drives it around, comes back, told Jones what he thought was wrong with the car. So the 3 of them left. Now, this fellow, Mr. Mays, he said after they left the apartment, he left about 30 minutes later and he went over to his sister's house because now they were going to go home for Christmas. So he packed up the stuff he wanted to take home with him to go see his parents. And he was walking down Graymont Avenue and he passed a U-Totem store. Now, he said when he came out of that alley there near the U-Totem store, he saw a young man pushing a young lady into a car, and he heard the woman scream. Now, he said he just glanced, didn't really stare all that much, didn't pay attention. But he said now what stood out in his mind was that car that the lady had gotten shoved into, it left off the lot. Well, right behind it was a yellow car. And he said that best he could figure that sounded just like the noise that suspect Jones's car made. Had that same peculiar noise. Now, when he came back to his apartment the next morning, he found a note from suspect Neil. Now, that note from Neil said, "Hey, I took your tennis shoes, but you can have my boots." Now, May said he picked up those boots and he looked at them, said they were muddy, and they had red spots all around the sides and across the toes. So he said he washed the mud and the red spots off the boots and he carried them with him to his sister's apartment. Now, another witness that would testify against the suspects, a fellow named Lynn, he said he knew all three of them. And he said he remembered the night well because he was watching a bowl game, UCLA and Alabama, December 20th, 1976. And he says he gets a phone call from Thomas. Now, suspect Thomas says, "Hey, come up here and meet us. We're going to be at a convenience store there in Pratt City, about 9:15. So he gets up there and he sees all three of the suspects, Neil, Thomas, and Jones. Now, that store there in Pratt City is on Highway 78 near Cherry Avenue. Now, Mr. Lynn says that he watched the three of them get in the car, and he said that their clothes were all ruffled up and looked like they'd been in a fight or something. He said he saw blood on the clothes of two of the suspects, and he asked them about the blood. And Thomas said that they'd been in a fight at a girl's house. Another witness that would testify against them, a Mr. Maddox, he went to college with those three suspects, and he was a frat brother with one of them. Now, he was living at home. Now, Thomas stops by to see him, and he had a television with him. Thomas left that TV with Maddox, Mr. Maddox. So now school started back up, and they had that TV in their dorm room. Now, Thomas gets arrested. Not long after he's arrested, he calls Maddox, and he says, "Get rid of that TV." So Maddox tells another fellow that lives in the dorm about what the suspect Thomas said. And this other fellow, he volunteered to take care of that TV. Well, now, unfortunately for Mr. Thomas and the other two suspects, Neil and Jones, this fella, he didn't destroy the TV, he kept it. Now, to top it all off, Mr. Maddox had seen that pistol that Mr. Thomas carried, the one he got arrested with. That was a murder weapon. He'd seen him with that pistol before. Now, the fellow that took that TV, he took it to his parents' house. Now, it stayed at his parents' house for about 3 or 4 days, and then the police called him. And he said, "Hey, we're going to come by and get that TV." So that tells you how long it took the police to go from point A to point B and so on and so forth. Because now once you get suspects, you start figuring out who their friends are, and that's who you talk to. So the police came by, and he happily gave them that TV. Now, according to Neil, he said, "Well, I was only 18 at the time of the victim's death, so they're not going to give me the death penalty." I'm too young. Now, all three of the suspects were eventually convicted of murder, kidnapping, robbery, on and on and on. They were all sentenced to death. Now, of the three, only suspect Thomas was actually executed. He was executed in the electric chair in 1990. Now, suspect Jones, now Neil, he's serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. And Jones, evidently they must have knocked his death sentence down all the way to just life, because as recently as 2008 he was up in front of the parole board. Now luckily they voted unanimously to deny his parole, which they should. Miss Sheehan's mama was there, just like she was the other time. There are not any words to describe these three suspects. And if there ever were three suspects that deserved to be executed, it was these three. I always find it amazing that didn't get a chance to appeal her sentence. And I would have to say that her murder was inhuman.